Welcome to the first episode of Distributed, a show where we go and explore the people and the vision behind Web3. I'm your host, Ollie Happy. That's my real last name, and I hope it makes you smile, because if it does, then it's done its job. Luckily for me, I am most of the time pretty happy. So why Distributed? This show is about sharing knowledge. And over the years, I've had so many interesting conversations with people about technology and what came before and society and where it's all heading and how things are going to change and how we could build a better world. I want to share some of those with you. So this show is for anybody who's interested in what's really going on behind the scenes on the Web3 industry and the internet industry in general. So today, I'm joined by guru of open source, Riccardo Iaconelli. I wasn't going to say it right.
Yeah,
Riccardo Iaconelli. Is that better?
that's good. But the guru made me laugh a bit. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Today's topic is open source and why we need it, why we started with it, the twists and turns in the tale, and how important the principles of being open are to the future of the internet. So, Mr. Iaconelli, let's start with you. A little bit about your journey.
Thank you, Ollie. First of all, let me say how happy I am that you're doing this, that you started this podcast, and how honored I am to be here as your first guest. I hope it's a start of something great, and I'm really happy that we talk about this topic, because it's one of these topics where the industry is always like it. We're at a point where it's sometimes taken for granted, or sometimes we don't know the ecosystem that created a lot of the richness that we experience nowadays with the internet and with the protocols and with all of the technology that we use daily. And it's important to know. It's important to know where it comes from, because it's an environment that needs to be cared for, and we need to be just responsible digital users, responsible digital citizens. And one of the ways to be that is that remembering that this doesn't just come for free because it's just a given, but it's people that built it. It's people that sometimes, if in some years, depending on the sectors, depending on the type of software, it's also very mercilessly putting in hours and hours of free work, and this allowed us to have this open environment and open and creation that we use every day. That is the internet, and there's a lot of technologies around the internet. And I started my journey in open source, and I wouldn't call it anything else than a journey. When I was really 12, probably a little bit before as a user, but as a contributor, like between 12 and 13 with the first translations. And this back in the days was my main motivation. Let's say during my teenager years, this was my motivation, to create. Like, it was a very ideological motivation to help to create a free alternative that everybody could use, that would not be controlled, or like the idea is that people should be able to use a computer without a corporation telling you how you can or you cannot use it. And also giving the freedom to people to experiment, to giving the people the freedom to tinker, and also seeing how powerful it is to build on each other's job and to create together something greater. Those were the first years of Wikipedia. Wikipedia was founded in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, and I started my contribution in 2003. So it was a bubbly era where we started to see what was possible when a community of hackers, a community of people would sit together around a virtual internet chat room on IRC and make really cool things happen. And this is how I started. I was really much into coding. I was really much into GNU Linux. I was into the user interfaces, and I started to work with KDE, which is a very well-known, back in the day was just a desktop environment and some applications. Right now, it's a community that does a lot of software for a lot of different things. And and this has been my baptism with technology and with openness and so on. And these are concepts that I took forward throughout in my career. I started. My first startup was when I was 21, but then I already had 7 years of experience in development and was building operating system for embedded software, for embedded devices, and that was my first technological work. But everything was always based in open source. I've led projects on education, on creating collaborative textbooks. I've done technical work. I've done more strategic work, more management work. I was one like, let's say the two probably biggest highlights from this point of view were when the moment where I was hired to lead the open source strategy at Mozilla, which in 2018 started to have a lot of thoughts about how to be more intentional in the use of open source, and not just in the use, but in the creation of open source. Basically, how to evolve from a model that emerged very naturally in the 80s and 90s and to turn it into something that would be more aligned to the new ecosystem, the new ways that people interact, the new possibilities, and the various ways in which open source proven to be a force for change in not just in the labs of hackers, but really in the industrial level. Or we can talk later a little bit more if you want about this thing. It's resulted into a work that's called the archetypes of open source, because you can really, like, you can make open source like you make Android, and you can make open source like you make Wikipedia, and those are two very incredibly different ends. Like, those are like really two ends of the spectrum. And the other big experience has been when I was tasked, and I'm still helping them for a few hours, like in some part of my time, with the Italian government, where I had to create open source strategy. It was a very interesting job, because we sat with the same, like, we sat 2-3 rooms away from the prime minister in the presidency. Wow. In the Italian presidency. Yeah, it was really nice. It was the first floor. Like, even the vice president didn't have an office there. It was us, the press room, and the secretary, and that was it. And our work was to create a digital agenda and an implementation of the digital agenda for the country. And my work was on open source, 100%. So how to create an open source ecosystem where companies could thrive in an open environment. In an open environment, so basically how to turn the spending, all of the spending that the government has, with a few tens of billions of euros on on software or software services, and how to use that leverage to create a more open environment, a more just and accessible environment, but also a more efficient environment where you wouldn't pay over and over. We create software of better quality. I mean, there's a million of things, and
we'll definitely come back to that, because that's where things really start to get exciting, when you look at the macro view, right, of a whole society full of people doing interesting things and not reinventing the wheel, the digital
total
wheel.
And you know what, there is a point where you can also go beyond the national level, because one of the things that I noticed that I found really funny when I joined is that in Europe, for example, where we have very similar legal requirements, but to be honest, I mean, around the world, I'm talking really about the basics of the software, like how to manage certain cases, how to manage complaints, how to manage like fines in the traffic, like this kind of stuff. That's not like a huge difference. And we do share software outside of the public sphere, but in the public sphere, for some reason, everybody's reinventing the wheel. Everybody's recreating from zero, instead of just sharing and concentrating on making the most efficient use of the resources. And open source is a great thing there. It's almost like an instant and obvious solution, because they don't really have. You have money, you have resources, you don't really have a competing interest. Like, if somebody else reuses your software, it's not like you don't have like a business problem, of competition and so on. And so why why reinventing the wheel and how to break the mechanisms, how to make people collaborate was a big part of my work. And I'm proud to say some of this has now become legacy, right? With the European Commission, with other countries, with decentralized standards. I can talk about it later if you want, but yeah, there's a lot to uncover there.
Okay. Thank you. You condensed a lot into a very short summary. So
yeah, and Ollie, of course, I also want to mention my work in Web3. That's where I met you, right? And into creating decentralized communities, because in the end, what in open source and traditional software is called a decentralized community, it's called open source. In the end, it's like a community of open source developers. It's not that different from a DAO and a decentralized group in Web3.
Exactly.
Yeah, the decentralized open, but in general decentralization, right? And then
yes,
that's what I was doing.
It's just so much more exciting than anything else you could be doing, right? That's the thing. Okay, cool. So you touched on a couple of things that I'd love to dig back into. So let's just give a little bit of a stages in the open, closed, open kind of history. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that, the history of open source?
So what I want to say, let's say open source, if I have to go at the real beginning, open source was everything. Like when we talk about the 60s and 70s, when computers were just invented, there was a norm on sharing code. It was how you would distribute programs. It was how technology was created, really. There was no concept of, oh no, this is copyrighted now and it's only mine and people don't receive it. And it was really just with the advent of the first startups and the first businesses around computers where entrepreneurs, not technologists, started to copyright and to close access to software. And this created a lot of backlash in the community, especially what then became the hacker community, or the community of the people that really the technologists that were making the software in the academic labs and beyond, and sparked this movement to instead recreate something free. You can trace it back to Richard Storman and his launch of the GNU project and the GNU manifesto, which was called GNU's Not Unix. That's the acronym, the recurrent acronym. I imagine most listeners will be, some listeners will be familiar, some will not be. But the point of this project was to create an open alternative, and the way that it was very beautifully done, because the way that Richard Stallman created was like one of the most famous and best hackers that are currently alive, and the way he created it, was he basically took the copyright law, which was the problem he was fighting against, and this original group was fighting against, and basically hacked the copyright law. And what I mean by that is that it used this concept of copyright, which was invented to protect and to limit the freedom of others to create copies or to improve software or to make it better or to resell it or to share it, or to study it even, and used it against itself. So it basically, anytime it was creating software, and created this license, which is called the GNU General Public License, the GPL, the famous GPL, which said you can only use the software and you can only, like, you're free to study, look at it, do whatever you want. You're free also to modify it. But the moment you do that, you're also forced to take this freedom and give them to whoever else you give the software to, right? So you basically receive some freedoms and you have to give them back. And this is started this so-called concept of virality of a license. And with this virality of a license, you started to create an ecosystem of software that would be open. And you really have this movement in history where it started to be very open at the beginning of the history with computers, where everybody was sharing software, also out of necessity, because it was hard, it was expensive to create software, so why not just like help each other out? And then there was a moment of privatization, so to say, of the software, where like the the first big investments arrived and started to, and did not understand this idea. Yeah, exactly. The money arrived, which is not bad, but it came from a different paradigm. Exactly. And a paradigm where all the value was in the code. But and next to it, this was the moment where they say, oh, and there was these jokes in the US where like if you did open source, if you're Linux, it was like a dangerous communist who would destroy, like anti-capitalist and anti-economic, and why would you work for free and all these kind of things, with to the modern ear sound like so funny, because all like, as you can make a lot of money just doing open source, right? There is many companies that make like the best I mean, I don't know how much of the percentage of the stack of Apple is open source, but everything from the kernel to web rendering engine of Safari to, like, the biggest companies in the world now are based on open source technology. Now they're not fully open source. We can go deeper into the future and other problems, but I mean, open source is a fundamental part of the any modern technological stack. But this shift really happened between the late 90s and the early 2000s, when it started to be accepted. Because in between there was this period where, for example, there was a major Microsoft dominance, and Microsoft was making war against open source and said this would be the end of computing. And on the other end, this is the reason. And so you had like massive corporation, massively funded, which were working on closed source systems. And on the other end, you had like a bunch of hippies that would spend their nights volunteering to create open source software. And the incredible thing was that they were competitive, which is something you would not expect in a normal economic world. Like, I mean, if I try to make steel and I just do it in the afternoon, I'm probably not going to be very competitive with some of the biggest, like I don't know, out of the top of my mind, steel companies. But you know what I mean. And instead, in software, it happens. And one of the reasons is because, but here we are maybe migrating topic. I'm already starting to talk about why it is so important to make open source. But it's beautiful to see how much more efficient it was, and really how the world now it's very much open to the idea of open source. Almost any developer uses open source package when they work, but it hasn't been always the case. But it's been really beautiful to see this, like, at the beginning, everything is open because it works better. Then money arrives, then we try to close in. We fight open source, and then just like open source naturally, it sweeps up and win. Not in every sector, but in most sectors it did. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really big one, right? Because I can remember in the late 90s, early noughties, I remember it's kind of like a word cloud for product people, right? Listening to the engineers, talking to the engineers, and seeing people do certain things like, we need to solve the authentication problem, so we'll build our own auth, and it'll take ages, and it probably won't work, and we'll have to maintain it, and we'll have bugs in it, and people will see things they shouldn't see. And then slowly, sort of in the noughties, people started to just talk about using something that was already pre-built and building with component libraries. In the 90s, I never heard anybody say component library, you know? And it's so cool to see communities grow, you know, and JavaScript particularly. it's just all libraries, right? And people building their interpretation and their twist on it. And it seems like the library that has the best community is the one that you should go for, you know? I agree. It's such a cool thing to see develop. Okay, so let's go into some of the benefits then. So what are the benefits to society? Let's start big with open source compared to centralized control and ownership.
Yeah. So, and also here I wanna make a very little note here. Open source is not about giving away ownership per se, right? I mean, it's actually based on ownership in a way, but it's an ownership that gives you freedom. Actually, it uses the concept of ownership to give people freedom to do whatever they want, only by the condition that they transfer this work. This is only the various licenses to be fair, but it's the core concept of openness, right? But the point is this: the point is that, okay, I am giving away my right to basically forbid you from doing certain things with your code, and in exchange, I get a lot. But that's personally. For society, it's such a faster way. When you start to stop, like when you stop relying on it, it's basically the same concept of diversification, right? Like you can have a very genius individual that does amazing work, but the moment that you start to have more eyes that work on it, more companies, more use cases, the amount of work and the quality of work just decreases. And so the speed at which you can do work, the quality of which, it's just so much better. So there is this huge benefit that is just the pace of progression.
Many hands, light work.
Yeah, many eyeballs. I mean, there's a famous saying that says, with enough eyeballs, our bugs are shallow. It's not 100% true, but it is true in some ways, right? Like when you create the proper structures to allow people to collaborate, and you create the proper incentives, then you can really you build an ecosystem that is based on network effects that is infinitely more powerful than what any one single entity can create. And then once you do that, you build something that is sometimes is slower to change. Like if you look at Wikipedia, it here depends a little bit on the kind of open source you're doing.
Takes
but
time.
Governance,
yeah.
Exactly. So you have other challenges, but you create something that's infinitely more resilient than what you could do, that you could only do internally. And then you have a lot of other benefits that are, depending on the use case, can be extremely important. Think, for example, about a cryptographic algorithm. And if I use cryptographic libraries that are open, I'm going to use some software that is trustable. And think when you're talking about censorship or we do need software that is trustable and auditable and inspectable, and where a lot of different people from companies and academias and so on have reviewed it and then screened it for security. I mean, some of the major security bugs we really were able to figure out because the code was accessible. And this is also what allowed us, the researchers that discovered these vulnerabilities, to instantly release fixes. If you don't have access to the code, this is a big problem. So you have this for trustability, for security. You're just not able to be like, the world of crypto is based on open source. You just can't have crypto without open source, right? It's a natural prerequisite. Yeah.
So let's talk about for the business then. And it could be a Web3 business, or it could be a traditional business in Web2 land that's considering open source. What are the benefits to them for going open source? And what I mean by this is, if I think, for adopting and using open source. So okay. if I think back a couple of years, I was at a scale up and things were moving very quickly, and people were starting to say things like, we should buy this, we should use that. These are things I've used before. They're really good. They're quite expensive. And the principle that we had was that we would, where possible, start with the open source option, and we would preference based on community activity and based on respectability and trust, and only if we couldn't find an open source alternative, then we would look at a privately held alternative. So why were we doing that? What are the benefits to the business?
It's funny because the law that I helped to work on, especially the secondary laws that implement this, is almost exactly is exactly the spirit and almost exactly the letter of the Italian law when it comes to acquisition of software, right? What you just said. So if you are a public agency in Italy, you have like, if you want to buy something that is proprietary, you have to write a document that justifies the fact that you have been looking for open source software, and if you find anything, you have to evaluate it, and then you have to make even you need to have a quote that says it was more expensive and it was harder to adopt an open solution or to even create an open solution and release it. And this you have to justify before being able to adopt a proprietary solution. And I mean, the reason is you are there's many reasons. I mean, for there's a reason of costs, right? Because you're paying, like, it's much more efficient. You're usually not paying for the source code. You can pay for services, of course, on top. That's absolutely fine. Open source software does not mean that it's free, that is like gratis.
Sure.
But
and that was a lot of the Mozilla Foundation, right? That taking something and providing services on top. Sure.
Yeah, it also had a slightly different, like, it had a different business. I mean, the companies that are releasing open source, they do it for many different reasons. They do it, like Red Hat, for example, they do package open source and do release open source, and then they do sell services. Like, if you have a problem, you just call them, or they offer like cloud service. They have that business model related to that. For others, they just say, you know what, it's really important for me. Say, I don't know, Google with
Chromium.
Yeah, with Chromium originally, let's say, because now they do something a little bit sneakier with the tracking of the users with Chrome, right? But for example, with that, let's say originally with Chrome, I was thinking HTTP 3 or more, but let's say also Chromium. Like, it's important for them that the web works well, because then more people use the web, and then more people use their product. So it's a way to also, or say I build, I don't know, machines that use a certain standard. If I take a toolchain and I release it as open source, it's going to be a better developer ecosystem for my solution. And so more people are going to be, like, there's going to be a community created of this, and then I'm going to sell the devices. I don't know, say.
Yeah, sure. Volvo with ABS brakes, or Philips with CDs, or whoever it was that came up with USBs as a plug. Sure.
So you create ecosystems. You can create millions of things. So as an adopter in general, whenever I have something that's open source, I have the concept of cost. I have the concept of resiliency, of not depending on one single vendor, because. Speaking of Google is a type of company that kills products every year. No? There is a famous website that's like Killed by Google that shows all the technologies that have been phased out year after year. This also happens in much more niche markets. I mean, this happens with public administration, where I've seen horrors of things where, like, the company that was providing a service just decided to not support it anymore, and so you have like, I don't know, virtual machines with Windows XP still running on hardware and under the desk of a of a guy in like the municipality, like things like this, right?
Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Don't turn it off.
Exactly. It was like there was like one person that knows how to reboot it from time to time because it gets stuck, like things like this, and all of this happens because then, or schools that got locked in because they have maybe bought systems for organizing, I don't know, the diaries or the communications, and they have all the data in proprietary solutions. And then at that point, they are even like, it could be that the company selling it says, I don't support it anymore. It's like, yeah, I can support it for you, but now you pay 10 times as much, right? If you're running with closed formats, if you're running with closed software, if you're running with something you can't control, then you're opening up yourself to these kind of.
And this is fascinating because on the surface of it, you know, what's that saying? And actually, I need to correct myself. Volvo was the seatbelt, and Robert Bosch was ABS brakes. It's important to be correct. that's my OCD not letting me go past it until I say what I know to be correct. But that's fascinating because there's this idea, isn't there? They used to say no one gets fired for buying IBM. And the idea was that IBM was a big company and it was a safe, secure thing. And if you were to go in that direction, and this is nothing against IBM, by the way, but if you went in that direction, it was seen as being safe, right? And that same thinking, when applied to going for something that's open source, like, let's say, the Bootstrap libraries and the sort of the early noughties, right? Just a lot faster to build buttons and build pages, you know? Thank you to whoever came up with that. But I remember when people were first talking about it, I thought, oh, does that mean that it's any good? Does that mean that we can trust it? Will it be here tomorrow? And the irony is that it's actually more, being open is actually more reliable and more likely to endure than some software that's perhaps end of life, right?
Yeah. And also the thing is, you can take responsibility, right? It's a matter of in the end of the day, accountability. Like with open source, you know exactly what you're getting. It's not all the time a panacea. But for example, also Bootstrap, for example, was funded by Twitter, right? Yeah, it was 2007, 2008, something like that. But this is really just memory, vague memory of when it was released. But the point is, and so there was some type of corporate backing. This is here another example of a benefit of releasing something as open source. They made it internally, and then they just released it, and then they have a community of people that uses it, that contributes fixes.
Sure. Or like Spotify, you know, Spotify with Backstage, right? You know, it's become so important to the DevOps community, and I'm pretty sure that it's become far more useful and valuable to Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes some types of a standard tool, and this is the thing. Like when you arrive to open source, of course you can't treat every software the same, because I can release something as open and as just a single developer. I actually have a fun story. So I have in 2008, I uploaded I think I contributed a fix. I'm not even sure I contributed a fix, but to a calculator that I liked that was called SpeedCrunch. And somehow, like, I forked this repository on GitHub, and to this day, and it's code I have never like really touched or owned or nothing. And if you go to my GitHub, it's like the latest commit is really 2008. What is it? 14 years ago. And I still to this day keep getting stars on that repository from unknown people, and people opening bugs, and people like thanking me, and all these kind of things. Just like, I honestly am leaving it there just for the fun, for seeing like how it goes, because it's like, it's not official. There is like, it's clearly written, it's a fork, it's clearly written, the authors are others in the README everywhere, but somehow like people apparently, I don't know, this repo must be ranked highly in the Google searches, and so I keep getting feedback,
and it feels good to
people
be
asking
useful.
me for, yeah, sure, yeah. I'm not sure how useful I am in this particular case, but
so let's talk about the types.
But this is what I'm saying. Ollie, no, just to finish. But the reason why I mentioned it was like, if you end up on an open source project like this, probably it's not the best type of open source you can get. But the moment you have a vibrant community, that's the moment where you really go beyond. Like, you need to have an evaluation, a minimum evaluation of what you're getting or why. Because if you get something that is widely used, there's going to be a lot of people with an interest in keeping the project alive. Okay. Recently, the maintainer of one of the biggest Python packages, Python wrappers over the Interactive Brokers API, passed away, and the community has built a fork that works even better now and is maintaining it, because there was a lot of traders that were using this particular package. So in a way, you are really working with a lot of people that share the interest in keeping this maintained, when there is a good community. And the thing is that you can do it because it's open source. If this person had made even a commercial service, even like a freeware, or even just charging $1 a year or something like that, this person passes away in a road accident. I don't know if this was a road accident, but I'm imagining, then all of this work is gone, and you have to restart from zero.
And as someone who builds things, I like the idea of legacy. I like the idea of having done something that's worthwhile, right? Yeah. Do you find that engineers prefer to work on things that they know, at least in elements, are going to be opened up and useful to others outside of their business?
Yes, of course. Of course, because, I mean, the best engineers, at least in my experience, the best engineers, because there's people that are shy about the code quality, but I don't I don't buy. No, there is many reasons for this. There is very practical and pragmatic reasons, which is, hey, if my code is open, the next employer is gonna see directly what type of beautiful code I write. And there is most of the engineers now have been formed on open source in one way or another, and so they know the power. Like, for me, when I started to contribute to open source, I'd been a user for 1 or 2 years before. And then I really fell for the idea, but because I remember seeing in the help messages say, hey, like, this was given to you for free. Add your 5%, add your like 5% of time, a couple of hours a week. It's like a way to give back to this mega community. And I used to say, really, it's like Wikipedia, if everybody gave half an hour of their time,
Yeah.
What could we build? What would be the limit?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you know the story of the Inca, and I know they weren't the only people that were doing it, but the Inca forced their citizens to tithe a day a week to working on things rather than paying taxes. And that constructed the Inca Trail all the way through the Andes. And I know that that's not necessarily voluntary, but it's an indication of what is possible when people come together.
No, but I mean, really, there is countless examples, and really the power of the network. I mean, already again, Wikipedia for me is the biggest example because it's really easily understood.
I love Wikimedia as a foundation. I just love the idea. Always loved it. Yeah.
And yes, I mean, it took some years to develop, but it was really just people that were motivated that said, okay, and I just sit, and this is now the knowledge base for the world.
Yeah,
it's perfect. No, I can always be better.
And what's fascinating is that it kind of went through stages, didn't it? In terms of, here's the thing, it works. A small group of people have started contributing to it, and then I felt like there was a pause, and I felt like there was, at least from the documentation that was coming out, I could see that the rules of governance, they kind of stopped the growth and focused on the rules of governance and the way that people would contribute and the way that people would edit and who would be allowed to edit and all these sorts of things. And once they had the roles and the access control set up, then it started to really scale, That's what it felt like, observing it.
Yes, I cannot give you, I don't know exactly what happened there in these stages of Wikimedia, because I was never involved so deep. I've been involved in the community, but only much later, 2010, 12. But what I've witnessed, I think they did a very important job of establishing themselves as a credible source, because at the beginning, yes. I still remember when I was going to university, there were professors that were saying, don't look at Wikipedia. There's no like citations. It's not peer reviewed. Anybody can write what they want, right? Now it feels silly. Everybody is like the go-to source for knowledge, for much knowledge, not for everything. But there's been researches of this is more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica, because of course, mistake. The thing is, humans make mistakes. It doesn't matter.
Of course, many hands light work. Totally.
Right.
Totally.
And it's about yeah.
So let's talk about what the community of developers brought with them into Web3 with these principles of openness, and how that has been expressed in some of the unique characteristics of Web3 ecosystems.
Well, so I would say that the main type of work, but already how it started with Bitcoin is, well, first of all, the licenses. The licenses that they use are the same of open source software, and in ways the development model, right? So Git and how to merge, like the merges, the evolutions, and so on. What crypto brought was two fundamental innovations. The first one is infrastructure, because so far we've been talking about open source, but open source is all about receiving a piece of code, and then what you do is your thing. And with crypto and Web3, you have to run infrastructure. So things like updating the nodes, negotiating the updates of the nodes on the protocol, and so on. It's not easy, because you are at this point needing to orchestrate a decentralized group that needs to collaborate, right? So it's not easy. It's not, again, like this speed crunch thing couldn't have happened in crypto. Like this repo that I put on 14 years ago, forgot about, and then in the last 2-3 years started to receive a lot of attention from Google, because you need to run infrastructure to maintain it, to keep it secure, to keep it updated, and so on.
And we know that this is important because we know that there are a lot of banks who struggle with the age and the complexity of running their legacy systems, and a lot of people in crypto have come together with people who've come from financial services, very aware of those problems, and they've looked to design in a much more future-proof way of building and maintaining infrastructure, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's a concept of technical debt, but there is really a concept of how do I, as a decentralized entity, decide what infrastructure, like run an infrastructure. Like Bitcoin is an infrastructure for digital payments. How do I create this with no entity, right? With no coordinated entity, but just with a bunch of people doing it. And then the solution to this problem is a second big innovation, which is money. How to, and this led also to some problems in the, for example, organization of DAOs. I'm not sure I'm 100% happy with the idea, like the like how many DAOs are organized, where the holder of the token is then voting with the amount of token that they have. So like kind of a, like in some ways I like it, some other ways I don't like it. It's not, I don't have a one view over it. It's a complicated
and everybody has an opinion on proof of work or proof of stake, right?
No, but that, even before proof of stake or proof of work, because this is also another, like this is a way that you create and organize. But I'm really thinking about how, for example, the DAOs on snapshot work, right?
Right.
When you want to vote a proposal, that's not necessarily community voting, exactly. Yeah. So and then many organizations tied to token holding, to a specific token.
Yes, and the number of votes might tie to the number of tokens. Yes, I see.
Exactly, and I mean, I understand it's one of the easiest way to do this, and it works for some communities, right? It works very well.
But it may not be the most democratic.
It may not be the best one for, and also it's not how, like, it's just different, right? Because in an open source community, if you didn't like what would happen, you could create your own fork of stuff. And there was a strong incentive to not do this because it's a lot of work to maintain a fork of a software. So there's this concept of benevolent dictatorship, right? You know, like Python, like the Linux kernel and so on, where the original creator is the one that has the final word over where something goes in or goes out. And this, for some projects, that led to incredibly high quality work. And for others, there have been forks that have been necessary.
Bitcoin has seen a number of forks,
like hostile forks. Right, and but then you need to manage to realize how do you run infrastructure. So the cost of a fork is even higher, and so yeah, it's a different problem space, right? And when we think about the future of open source, this is something that is going to be where, in a way, the experience of crypto, I think, can contribute back a lot to how to run.
This is really important to me, because that's what I, as a kind of an infrastructure guy, I look at Web3 and I'm like, yeah, there's some really good concepts here that I could see really helping and really adding to what people have already been doing. And then my next thought is, how big can that get, and how can that feed back into what the rest of the world is doing? So yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so the frontier parts, like what changed between the noughties and the last years and now is that right now, like back in the days, most software used to be run locally. And you would have the web, but the web would be a way to access some information, not really, or some data, not really the software, the application software. This would all run locally. And this is a paradigm where open source would work really, really well. And there are some other, but right now, most of software runs remotely. Like if you think about a job, usually if you have a browser, most digital jobs you can do. I mean, this is in my experience. Like it will not definitely hold true for all digital professions, and definitely not for all professions, but for a good number of digital professions, like you have. It's also like it's a type of technology where most of the producers have switched to, because it's much easier to deploy. It's much easier to deploy updates. It's much easier to keep the infrastructure secure. Like there's a lot of advantages to not just send out an executable file. It's multi-platform also by default.
I'm one of few people in Web3 old enough to remember shipping software, and you have to be, man, the levels of quality control that have to be done when you're only shipping 4 times a year.
And the installers and the distribution media and the dependencies and the various version of operating system and conflicting software and the configurations. Like it's messy. It's messy. I used to do this. Actually, I still have a lot of experience in that, actually, because KDE, the desktop environment, was all about applications and operating system with graphical user interface that will run on all sorts of hardware and operating systems. So, but so there are valid reasons why, and also another reason is that if I'm running everything from my server, I have a precise control over who is using my software. Right? Piracy is not really a thing anymore, software piracy. But the downside is that it's much harder to collaborate on, like, to really have good open source, because you introduce the infrastructure model, right? Because you not only need to produce a software, you also need to run it. And running it means there is operational costs to what you're doing. And so you can't just have a couple of people in the afternoon that dedicate their time. I mean, you can have that for the software, but then you also need to run it. And yes, of course, there is providers, but it's not like, for example, Nextcloud is one of the biggest examples, I would say, of a very good open source software that runs on a server. But still, it's not the same. It's not like downloading Inkscape and using it instead of Illustrator. Right, it's you need to find a provider, a good one, trust, and it's like a lot more things to check, and a lot more, like, then you have to compare. Like, there's a lot more friction there, and if you're a technical user, of course, you can manage your own server, but again, there's more friction. So in a way, crypto has solved this problem, because they run infrastructure for open source software in a way that it's not only a good way, but it's the best way. It's actually the only way, even, I would say. Like
some
when I
might
ran
say
the network,
distributed
right?
and decentralized, right?
Yeah, totally.
I think it's worth just spending a moment here. Something that you taught me was the difference between centralized, federated, and decentralized. Could you want to just touch on each of those for anybody that's not aware?
Sure. So centralized is a model, like the most traditional model that you can think of. There's one entity that creates something. Like, imagine we're running like a network in crypto. So a centralized model is where a company, for example, creates the network, runs the nodes, and allows people to connect to it. A federated network is where it's not one entity running the nodes, but maybe it's a federation of entities. Say, for example, I don't know, I can't think. I was thinking something in the public sphere, but it's basically a network that's built by authorized participants. Think about elections, for example. Okay, when you go, let's see if this metaphor holds. Probably, let's see. But when you are at elections, you go to the ballots, and then you can vote. And when they count the votes, there is a number of people that's authorized. It's not everybody who can just go in and make sure that the count is correct, but there's a few people that are selected. This is a federated model where you have more control over a centralized entity. It's not just a centralized entity which says, trust me, bro, I count the votes correctly. You can have independent participate. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But it's still a level. There is a level of approval. There is a level of agreement. There is a level of, or maybe one representative per political party is able to witness the votes, and that's it. Those are the registered people, and you have to trust it. And in that case, it works because you have conflicting interest. But in a different space, it may be something different. And then you have a decentralized model, which is basically the permissionless version of this federated model, where anybody can join the federation based simply on some criteria that are ideally easily reachable. It's not like you don't need the permission of anybody. Maybe you need to, I don't know, stake a certain number of tokens or do something else. But then you become a part of this network. And the network could be anything, right? It could be a network of crypto, but it can also be development access to a specific infrastructure or whatever, part of a decision process, part of a group. Yeah.
And we're starting to see some really interesting, particularly in freight. I've come across quite a few projects that might have started with the idea of maybe we should have a blockchain and then we could record all of the movements of freight, and perhaps we could get a number of companies together and then we could all become more efficient. And then what's interesting is that that's led to what appears to be partnerships on other things like standards and ethics and so this concept of shared use, I guess, is being now applied to other areas of their business where they could become more efficient that are outside of a blockchain.
I'm not sure I buy the blockchain for physical good stuff because there is just so many security problems in there. It's usually more marketing than a real thing. But as you say, there is many other ways people can collaborate. It's just like I don't trust the word blockchain in those. I don't know the specific. I mean, I've seen many examples of use cases where blockchain has been misused.
I totally see that, and there's a reason that the show's not called blockchain, right? Because it's in some ways I have become a bit weary of talking to people who say, either blockchains are everything or they are nothing. To me, it's not about that. It's more the what's really going on in Web3 generally that interests me. Do you know what I mean? And I guess what I'm saying is that in that example, I don't think the blockchain really worked for those freight forwarding conglomerates. But what it brought was the idea that they could work together. Do you see what I mean? And that feels a bit like the feedback loop from Web3 in the spirit of openness and collaboration, extending back into the traditional world.
Yeah, sure. And like in the end, also the word blockchain, I mean, we have other type of technologies. When I'm speaking about the innovations that Web3 has brought back to Web2, is more about how do you align, like the governance models, like how do you align the incentives? How do you create, like also showing the possibility that you can run infrastructure in a different way. Still, I'm not sure it completely generalizes to traditional like cloud software, but
and we'll see what projects like Filecoin and Flux,
Ollie,
like how will they go versus AWS? We don't really know yet, right? But
right now it is, and I mean right now there is a big problem in open source, which is how do you define open source? Like how do you evolve the model? What does it mean to be open in a cloud space? And this is the question number one. What do I mean? Many cloud providers right now, like there have been very important cases of major cloud providers like Amazon taking an open source software, installing it on their machine and offering it as a service, doing modifications that were not shared with the rest of the community because of the specific licenses that this software had. And basically creating forks where they would extract value from the community but not contribute it back, which it's kind of a tragedy of the commons in a way, where the specific participant is not incentivized to open the code and is not forced anymore by a license, because the license only speaks about when you run it locally. But nobody's incentivized, but at this point, like then the ecosystem dies, right? And so there have been kind of hacks, but that made the software no longer open source. Some projects have adopted licenses which give restriction on who can use the software or who can use without contributing it back. So it's something that could be rational, but it's very short-sighted. Because, and I don't know who took this decision, for example, in Amazon, but there is other examples. Some of these companies that have been hard pressured to make profits and to make margins, to increase their margins, to increase their revenue, have taken some of these steps without realizing that what they're doing is they're killing the very source of their wealth. Because the moment they contribute back,
taking too many apples off the tree.
Yeah, they don't realize that by not contributing back, they make the community of these projects die, and then in the end, they are the ones that lose from this, because then the software dies. And so instead of fostering a good ecosystem, so basically change, right? Like in an open environment for this specific type of software, what you want to do, what is the best way, is a win-win situation, where you contribute to the ecosystem grows and creates more value for everybody, and then you still keep your part of the cake, but you have a bigger cake. Instead of trying to squeeze a little bit, like a few percentage points of the cake, but we're shrinking the cake. And then you have
a smaller piece of a bigger pie, right?
Sure. Yes, and yeah, like you have a bigger portion of a smaller pie. Exactly, and this doesn't happen, unfortunately, overnight. So it's not instant, but you obviously see that when ecosystem starts to falter like this, they create mistrust. They create, there is a reasons why these. I'm thinking now in particular about a database, but these projects they've grown so much because of the way they were developed, right, and the value they created, and all of these business cases have been born because of this. And so you have to have just this little vision of the future to keep them open. But anyways, here I digress. The point is that right now the open source community is questioning, saying, okay, but this is obviously against the spirit of open source.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to the community.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, and also to the very reason why this software exists. So how do you take this and bring it back to a world which is based on the cloud, like based on the servers that send you the software, and how, like, should it go all in and use something like the Afro GNU public license, which sounds really like all parts of, almost like in some interpretations, it's all parts of your infrastructure needs to be open source the moment you distribute this as open source, which led to companies banning Afro GPL entirely from their stack. Right? I don't necessarily believe this interpretation is warranted, but there is companies that are just afraid, and then they do that. And how do you put this? Like, do you go there, like to go nuclear, or is there like something in between that can be had? But it's not easy. It's not easy in this new model. And the second part is, which is the hottest potato right now, which is AI. What does it mean to have an open source AI?
Never heard of it.
No, Llama 3, like Llama is open source. You have the weights available. You have others, but like, what does it mean to collaborate in an AI world? What does it mean to collaborate when like in open source, the creation of the code is expensive, but then the copy is very cheap, and the modifications on the copy are also very cheap, right? In AI, the modifications are very expensive because you have to retrain models. And maybe the software is very cheap in a way, right? It's easy. It's understood how to make an LLM.
And there's an element of machine learning in it. Yeah, sure.
But you need data, for example. So what happens to the data? How do you treat copyright? Like, it's all new questions that are coming up, but they're very important to answer, and to answer properly in order to build a good future for open source. How do you deal with these two topics? With cloud, we already have some ideas, right? We have some good softwares, and we have some like, I would say like that. With the cloud, I feel like the dice have been cast, and now they're rolling, and we're waiting to see what will be the solutions that are going to stick, and what will prove beneficial for the ecosystems. Is it introducing new licenses with new restrictions? Is it introducing like non-commercial clauses? Is it introducing other type of work? Is it creating new consortiums and federations of people that want to create open source? And instead, for some other, like for AI, it's all a new word. It's also legally a new word. Like how you treat data. What does it mean to have derived work? What does it mean to have an open source AI?
Yeah, and if an AI has generated something, does it have the same legal value as if a human has generated something? There's a lot of questions.
Right. And somehow, of course, they are more, it's a question that has been there for a long time, but now with LLMs, it's much bigger. Right.
Yeah. What else do you see coming? What else do you see in the future?
I would say those are the two biggest steps. I want to mention, I see there is another very, very important benefit, which is digital sovereignty of open source. That I would say is a big one for society and is a huge one for governments and public
digital
sphere.
Sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Europe has commissioned, the European Commission in 2022, I think, had commissioned a very beautiful research that showed they were wondering how much to invest in open source and how much to make it a priority for the European Union strategy, digital strategy. And they figured a few very important things. Well, the first one is a huge boost to the economy. They calculated that if they only could increase open source work and contributions in Europe of about 10%, they would generate around 100,000 GDP within the member states, which is huge. It's a huge part of the budget. With a minor, it's just like what people already do in open source plus 10%. And the second part is that, as we've said before, right now, for the efficiency in which you're able to create software, for the intrinsic efficiency of the open source development model, you are able to, with less resources, compete with bigger players. Again, it's not 100% sure this is with AI.
This is a big one.
Yeah. And this means that, and the second thing is also you are able to really control your stack. So whether it's an individual or a family or an organization or a nation, being able to own the supply chain of the software, being able to look into what is there, to really work with it, that's major, right? You and I know that right now, as Europeans, most of our technology is designed in the US and is built physically in China.
Yeah.
Overly simplifying, of course, right?
Sure. And even on a very basic level, that seems less sustainable, less logical than building more locally. Yes.
Yeah, and things like you don't have an operating system that is widely available, or like a smartphone that's not built in, like, that doesn't have a lot of US, that's not built by US corporation. So there is a point. I'm thinking here about governments, but again, really, it's about governments, but it's about all levels of society where you want to, you can. It's a double-edged sword, right? But the point is about being more sovereign and being more responsible for your digital future. It goes both ways. You can't have one without the other. Yeah. You can't just expect to have a free, to just switch everything to open work and just have this magic thing called the community that does the work for you for free. You need to feed it. You need to contribute it. But the good thing is, if you do that, it's probably going to cost you much less than if you do it in the traditional way, simply because you can just, for many reasons, but the simplest of which is just you can pool resources together with other people that have your same problem.
Which has always made sense.
Yeah. And the second thing is that you can really take the responsibility to move it forward, but also then you get the benefit of being the one that moves it forward.
Which is fascinating, because if you think about that for a moment, you are the Italian government. You purchase some software or some hardware or something proprietary, and it's almost like love at first sight, marriage at first sight, right? Once you're married, that's it. and there wasn't, and the knowledge and the thinking that happens in choosing that vendor becomes really important, because then of course that vendor is locked in. It's interesting to think that by going for something that's open source that everybody can use, that actually the Italian government can direct resources into, as you say, taking that in a direction that's beneficial for them. That's a wonderful thing.
And it can foster local businesses, and it can foster local work, and it can foster more. Just like, if imagine now, I mean, this is way far from what's happening right now, but imagine that Italy or Europe, because I don't believe maybe this is necessarily something that should be done at a national level, but maybe like an extra national level with the economic bloc you're part of. But in the European, like, they create their own operating system or their own like email servers or whatever, but you start to create like businesses that deliver this software and this work. And these businesses, while in the process of doing it, they're going to create valuable work, and they're going to create know-how. And this doesn't need to be a full recreation from scratch. As we said, it's open source. So maybe you start to readapt packages that are already working, or you start to work with, I don't know, why not China, right? And you create together, or the US, or whatever block or group or whatever, or like it could be a private organization, it could be like Google, or whatever, right? Whoever wants to join can join. But then you all
because even if you're working with a Chinese manufacturer of solar panels that are used in Europe, if you were, say, contributing to the software project that was running that solar panel, then certainly you would end up having better solar panels, right?
Yeah. Or just like take the example of email. Now it's probably like not the let's say, because it's an easy one, right? Imagine you want secure emails. Of course, the Italian government wants secure emails. The European Commission wants secure emails. The Chinese manufacturer wants secure emails. It's a need for all of them. So it may be that the one is like they are trying to protect from each other, but in the end they all want the same. So if they all put together the resources and build the same thing together, why not? Even if technically they're building it against each other, there is really no limit to this. And so, but what you do is, okay, imagine like the European Commission commissions a European agent, like company, to do that, and they agree to work on the same software that some Chinese manufacturer is doing, but they develop a know-how. And then this know-how, they can create additional software. They can resell it to other people. Like you create value. You create value both in the thing, the assets you're creating, and in the intangible assets, in the knowledge that you spread. And with open source, it's so much easier to do that, right? Because you have lower barriers of entry. Like right now, if I buy
because
Google
some of the work has already been done. Sure.
Yeah. If I buy Google Workspace, if the Italian government buys Google Workspace, the maximum it can get, and ask a local consultant to configure it, is going to be know-how on how to use Google. It's not real know-how on a real solution. In the end, you're still not only locked in, but you create even more lock-in, because then you have more experts around that are more able to
it's kind of
work
a cycle.
in it. Yeah. So this is why I say digital sovereignty, because you really can take responsibility for what you have, and you really became sovereign of your own digital work and digital future. And this is a world I want to live in, because I can understand also there is people that say, I prefer that everything is just owned by the US, because this means that there is no war. We cannot make war with the US. I say yes, but it also means that there is a lot of control that happens. I mean, right now, I don't want to speak about the horror stories that I've seen in the, but I mean, I imagine right now if a group is using Microsoft, I mean, I don't want to allege things. The thing is, it's we are already in the hands. I mean, I look at my phone; it's been made in the US, and there's a US company that has. Sure. If they wanted to spy on,
we as a society have really explored centralized control and use and licenses to the nth degree, haven't we?
And I want to believe that they are doing the best they can, and they for sure. Many of these things are verifiable, and there's reproducible bits, and there's a lot of things in practice.
But to me, in the end that's like this layer. I feel like there's a much more important layer, which is efficiency and speed and enjoyment and giving. And I just feel like a at least potentially open community just gets more done, you know?
Yeah. And there is more diversity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a system that works the best. I mean, people now keep seeing the entrepreneurs as happy, but like all of these companies are not doing open source things. Yeah, but if you look, all of this work is only enabled because 90% of the stack is open source, right?
Right.
So we can
Which is
pretend to not
fascinating. When you said that a large amount of Apple stack is open source, I mean, I knew that. People have told me that before, but it still surprises me every time I hear it, because such a high value, successful business, it kind of feels like it must be proprietary everything, but it's not the case. It's interesting to know that they can come together.
There is no company, even Microsoft, which is, it's explained, it was one of the biggest warriors and like staunch enemy of open source, now has embraced it entirely and has a development environment that's Linux based. This is the thing. We can look at the last mile and say, oh yeah, but this is like proprietary, and you'll see all the startups making the software and say, oh yeah, but this is proprietary. But then you look at the operating system, like you look at all of the stuff, just a programming language that all of these companies use. They're all open source right now.
Yeah. And there's a good reason for that, because they need them to be continually improved and vibrant, and they need to have people able to code in them so that they can access more talent, and it continuously grows, doesn't it?
So we are really like I don't think there is, to go back to an earlier question you asked me, I don't think there is really a way to avoid open source if you want to do technology. What you can avoid is you can adopt it intentionally and like aware of what you're doing, or you can just adopt it like blindly, you know? So it's all about your level of I want to say it differently and better. It's how consciously you adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this
how
makes all of the
intentionally.
difference for me.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And bringing it back to the boardroom, for any group of people that are running a business, something you'll often hear is we just need to make sure that the decisions we are making intentionally. I totally agree. Yeah. Thank you for all of that. We could talk for hours and hours, but I think you've given a good summary.
I just want to say, because I think this is beautiful, and maybe if people are interested, they could check it out. One of the works that I have followed. I mean, I've collaborated to that. It's been a much greater job, but one of the work that I sponsor that they help bring to life. This is a good way to say it. Has been something called the Open Source Archetypes, and the whole of the work was on realizing, hey, instead of just saying, okay, open, even if you want to do open and say, oh yeah, like was Mozilla's case, right? It was like, oh, we're going to be open by default. It's going to be about, no. Look it back. What are your project goals? And then depending on your project goals, let's see how open source can help you to achieve them. For whatever reason they are, it could be, I want to make the best software ever, to I want to build a good ecosystem, to I just want to go as fast as possible, to I want to be as resilient as possible and as trusted as possible, right? It can be many different things. Okay, I want to build like a trusted partnership with my competitors to develop it, but the thing is, always restart from this. If you do open source in other ways, I mean, you may get some benefits incidentally, but there's just so much more value to be gained. I mean, this is kind of my work right now, right? It's about consulting companies and groups and organizations and nonprofits, whatever it is. There is a lot of entities that need this type of work, and realizing how an open strategy can benefit them. I've been working for Wikimedia Switzerland lately on how to work on both the internal tools and how to work on their participation strategies for their members.
So when you say archetypes, do you mean the types, the different ways of adopting open source in your strategy? Is that what you mean?
I mean archetypes because it was called this way, and this is what you can find if you Google for the open source archetypes. You find this first initial model.
We'll put it in the show notes.
But It's really it's some, yeah, you can call it types, I would say, but it's really is how different models of open source are organized depending on the governance structure, depending on the licensing choice, depending on the openness of the community, depending on many different factors. And you have to choose the right archetype for your goal. So say, for example, I give you two concrete examples, so to really make it concrete. Say you are, you want to make like your Signal, right? And you want to make a very good messaging app, and you have the funds, and you just want to go very fast. And the main benefit for you is I want to be trusted. I want like people to be able to really inspect every single line and be secure. Then there is an archetype where collaboration is not really important for you, but you just want to be extra transparent, and then you publish a source code, and you actually govern, like having a complex governance structure is just going to hamper you, because you're going to be doing the development anyways. That's not the bottleneck.
Because what you want is the community validation, not the community contribution.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you're Wikipedia, you're on the other end. You do want a massive governance structure, because it doesn't really matter to you to go super fast. It matters that you go like very, very resiliently, and you don't make mistakes, or you make as little as possible, right? So, and you want to have a very large base of contributors. If you're building a mass market software like LibreOffice, then it's a little like it's something in between, because you still want to have a lot of features, but you want to have something that's widely adopted, and you want to have participation. If you're building something like a standard or like a library, like I don't know, libSSL, you have a different set of work entirely, because you're not there facing end users, and you want a more like federated model where you have partners you work with, but they're not anyone on the world. I mean, they could be anyone on the world, but there is like a very, very strict selection for quality whenever you include a contribution, because you don't want supply chain attacks. So there is like many ways. As I was saying at the beginning, like Android is open source, parts of Android, but good part of Android is open source. Wikipedia is open source. Signal is open source. But you wouldn't say, like, you wouldn't put Android and Wikipedia in the same boat. Like, it's like so different.
Yeah, it's a spectrum.
Many ways. It's actually a multidimensional spectrum. So choosing the right flavor of open source is oftentimes makes the difference between creating a successful project or not, and really reaping the benefits. Like I've seen, in a way, the Italian government, this was their problem, right? They had in the law since 2013 this idea of choosing open source first, but it was only in 2017 when we started to do this intentionally. Like when I arrived and two other people arrived, and we together sat down and created the tools to make it happen. Created a catalog, a decentralized catalog of open source software, and created really not just the idea, yeah, it needs to be open. Most people, like in public administration, did not even know what it meant. But it's the moment you make it operational that you start to create. Now there is thousands of software between Italy, and now the European Commission has basically copied the same model and is spreading it throughout Europe, so that there's going to be more software sharing, and so on. Other governments around the world have chipped in with similar work. I mean, the idea itself, in a way, is open source, right? But
it's very meta.
All this is possible because we were not just saying it's open. Like the difference between the failure and the success was in really creating, like greasing all of these other elements, making the connections, building the tools when you need to. For many projects, you don't need to. For the Italian government, you needed to. Like this decentralized catalog. But it's really about thinking about the whole model, thinking about the incentives, thinking about the collaboration mechanism, having a clear idea of how things work both technically and legally, and from a community point of view, from a product point of view, like really bridging it all together. And and this has been my specialty in the work, but it's really how you, like, if you don't do this work, you get 10% of what open source can be. or even zero. Like it can even be counterproductive, to be honest, if you do things the wrong way. If you were trying to develop a signal like you develop Wikipedia, you waste a lot of money and resources, and you hamper your own development. And after 2 years, everybody's like, "Ah, oh, fuck open source. It's not. It's just holding us back."
Yeah, we didn't get what we expected. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just such an interesting area, isn't it? But let's talk about you instead now. So something that is important to me is also we get excited about things, and I'm surrounded by people who get excited about technology, and we work long hours and we get tired. So what are you doing to stay balanced? And maybe what are you fiddling with just off camera? Perhaps you'd like to show it.
This is clearly a studied question, Ollie. No, I actually want to say I will answer and I will show it, but it's a bit more complex answer. It's actually very beautiful. It's something I work on a lot, especially lately. In the past few years, it's been a big topic of research for me. And there is many practices. There is movement practice. There is meditation practice, and there is really work with more with the human body and less with the human mind. And it came out in 4 beautiful words, which I now try to look for in everything I do in life, which is simplicity, imagination, connection, and presence. And this is the way that I've seen that my nervous system really regulates and really feels good with. And lately, one of the passion has been to come back to what you were asking, and yeah, definitely, I brought it up now before we were talking, so I have it, and it's a very soothing work. Is I build bespoke ropes that are used for bondage and shibari, bodywork, shatsu. It's a communication tool that you can use for anything you want. And I just made some very beautiful, and they're very beautiful because I learned to spin them. And they're entirely different than what you couldn't buy on most places online, where you buy just, you can buy jute, but it's industrially made from a machine, means it has a core, it means it's much less resisting, it means you cannot do many patterns. And so some of the beautiful ones that I have made here, I make them here in my apartment. I build myself tools to do it, and I process them, I sing them, and you can have it. Like, and what I'm experimenting in lately, it's been to create like multiple, like the thing is, every one of these rope has between 36 and 90 yarns that are each, these are all 8-meter ropes, most of the ones that I make. And then I do body work also with them, right? So I do either sometimes artistic things like shibari, or I make more like shatsu and other things that I'm training on. It's such a deep, like, boom. And this really, like, my slightly neurodivergent brain has a lot of fun with this, because every one of these rope, like, you have to take yarns that are 10 to 11 meters long, and then tense them at the right tension and tune them. And one of the best ways to do it, I learned, is with the ear, like to make sure they all do the same note. And then once they're together,
Wow.
you twist them, and this makes the first like twist. And then you take 3 twists, and then you twist them together in the other direction, and that starts to make a strand. And then you take 3 of the strands, and then you twist them in the other direction, and then you start to make the rope. And then, of course, when you make the rope, I didn't really have any here because all of these have been processed already. I have some more here.
What do you mean when you say processed?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So here you can see some I put, like, with neon fibers, and then glitter, and many other colors and things. So once you get them off the hooks, here you see these are like the hooks of the last strands that were made. So once you make them off the hooks, they're very fuzzy and they're very stiff. Like this, for example, are quite stiff ones. You can see there. These are much more processed already, and they are much softer. And this is what you want, right? When you tie or when you handle it also, because otherwise it's scratchy. I mean, there is people that enjoy pain and whatever, but it's not why they are intended. And they need to be very comfortable, because they need to make you relax, this type of ropes. And so what you do is you burn them. I have like a camping gas, and I just, it's called singing, and it burns all the fluff out, and then you treat them with organic jojoba oil or something. It's called like butter rope, which is like a little mixture of jojoba oil and beeswax, and like finding like sources and everything, and then how you break into them so they are like looser. And one thing I'm experimenting, I was experimenting today. I was like, I'm trying to perfectionize a process which uses the oven and heat to loosen up the fibers, but of course without drying out the rope. So that's a very interesting one. Other people prefer to do it mechanically. I used to do it, but it ruins a little bit the rope, like it shortens a little bit the lifespan. And what I really want to try to do is the best ropes you can get. And there is so much love and art and passion that I'm putting. Like I do.
Can
also
you hold it up like you did for me earlier today, and just show us how the three strands?
Yeah, for example, here. Yeah, let me show you. Maybe with this one, you can see it a little bit better, just because of the colors, right? So
Yeah.
so this is the way that they're tied together, and then don't do this at home if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, and every one of them, let me see if I can open it and show it, has these 3 twists. And I think you can see a little bit of this.
Yeah,
right, these are 3 twists. And then this twists. Wait.
So it's things twisted on things, treated so that it becomes.
And every time you do this, so these are twists, and then these twists are individually made of other yarns, right? So this is a structure you basically can't do with a machine.
It kind of almost looks like DNA.
Yeah, you could say that. I don't bunch it up into a chromosome though, because otherwise it would completely screw up the texture of the rope. But this is actually super resistant. Then you create. Yeah, you're able to really create stuff that can run, like you can take care of it, of course, but it runs so long, it runs a lifetime. I still have to see one of them getting ruined. And
I mean, it's obvious to anybody who's listening or watching your face light up in your body, just kind of open up how much you enjoy this, right? But what have you got from the process of making ropes? Like what do you love about it?
There is like an ancient art, but there's also like a modern interpretation. There is a lot of creativity. There is a lot of what the words that I was saying, like the presence of putting down this and tuning them, and then finding a good process to do it, and then really seeing this, that are like little works of art being used by people that are professional, and then they create their own art with that. Like there is such a beauty, or also sometimes me, but like I can tie, but there's people that have been tying for 20 years.
Yeah, that's
and also, like, this is the other cool thing is, like, yes, I make them for whoever wants. In general, like, I have my standards and my preferences, but the moment where this is why I call them bespoke, because I work with the riggers to make when they don't know, I can give suggestions, but when they know, I can make them exactly the right tension, because there is so many factors to control. There is a texture, depending on how you do the proportion between the twists and the strands, how much tension you work with when you work with individual ropes, to what level you tuned it, how much you twist. Like you can have like this type of where is it now? This one.
If you ever needed proof, folks, that software engineers are makers in their core, here it is.
And building the tools to do it. I mean, there is just so much level of, and also it feels like it activates really all of my senses, because they need to smell good. You can treat them with essential oils. They have to feel good in your hands. They have to bend good. You have to. There is just so much. You have to do good chemical products. You have to have them that they don't like kink too much. There is just so much at play. And then there is something innate. I don't know, Ollie. Like there is a part that I don't know,
it's
that is
tactile,
just my brain.
Isn't it?
Yes. my brain just lights up making them and looking at them and working with them. And yeah, I honestly I
that is
realized it
all that's
because
important. So cool.
yeah, that's all that's important. Like I can look at her. I dream. I go to bed and I think about knots and solutions to knot problems, or how to do. I don't know. The other idea I had the other day is really to put like a fully black rope with a golden thread that goes around, which feels so luxurious and so beautiful. There is a sensuality of it that is just amazing.
That's so cool. And folks, that's where we will end it.
Ollie, thank you for letting me speak about this, because I feel that there is a normalization and it's really beautiful. It's really important.
Oh, it's really important. It's the balance between the digital and the human and the physical. Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for sharing so much. It's been really interesting. And folks, this is the beginning of our journey together. And I think we probably will see Riccardo again in the near future. So thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And folks, tune in where you know to tune in. Subscribe where you need to subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.